So one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you guys about my usage of the CC mobile workflows is because I actually do use them. Working for Adobe, you can get kind of sucked into the maelstrom of marketing, which tells you, everything that Adobe ever ships is amazing and useful, and then as a user, you get down into some of those workflows and you're like, well, yeah, this one is useful. This one really seems more kind of like an experiment to see if it could be useful. And I definitely, having worked for Adobe for 8 years now, I've seen a lot of that, where some of the technology seems it's ready to ship, but it's more of like a thought experiment in the minds of the engineers and the product people saying, would people actually use this in the real world? And as community professionals, you guys are sometimes on the front lines of taking the Adobe customer feedback from these experiments. And so thank you for that. I'm, as a solutions consultant, right, this is my official calling card and my Twitter handle. As a solutions consultant, I'm on the front ends of that from kind of a bit of a different standpoint since I'm positioned in the enterprise accounts. So some of the customers may not be part of the broader Adobe community, and they may seek out support and inspiration and ideas and resources directly from the solutions consultants and not necessarily the forums or the ACP program, although many of them do seek training and enablement through you. So my vantage point is very similar to yours in that I'm customer facing and often have to justify why Adobe pulled this product or shipped this new product or changed it in some way, when those products or workflows become mission critical to their everyday operations and to their creativity. So my job at Adobe as a solutions consultant, and many of you know solutions consultants, but I focus on the government sector, which is a whirlwind of fun, let me tell you. But what that means is that I go all across the United States, the continental 48, and yes, I have had to go to Hawaii once for work, but that's not pictured here. So I travel a lot across the country to defense, intelligence, federal, civilian, state, and local government agencies, kind of bringing the Adobe Creative Cloud and the Adobe Document Cloud, what's new, how it's going to be mission critical to your workflow in your government agency. And I do a lot of that. So I'm mobile a lot of the time, which is why when I look at the Creative Cloud mobile applications and the platform that the digital media organization inside of Adobe is starting to lay as the foundation underneath these mobile apps and the desktop apps, it becomes less of demoware and it becomes real world usefulness to me. And what I try to convey when I go to these different government agencies and organizations is not, isn't Adobe great because we've got jolly candy-like mobile apps and a cool platform. It's really more trying to talk to that knowledge worker segment, to folks who may be familiar with PDF and they may be familiar with government workflows and Acrobat, but at their heart, everybody needs the ability to communicate more effectively. And that doesn't necessitate learning an entirely new tool, a professional grade tool like InDesign or Dreamweaver or any of the creative tools. They don't have to become necessarily a Photoshop expert or an Illustrator master in order to learn to communicate more effectively. And what the mobile apps and the Creative Cloud platform are sort of seeding the way for, from my vantage point, having used these tools, is really, it's twofold. It's making the professional more productive, inspired, and creative, but it's also opening a door for the knowledge worker, for the non-professional user, right? And so that's one of the reasons, since I know that you face the community in both of those segments, I wanted to unpack for you a little bit how I'll tell you my story a little bit with the customers that I face and how I position both the professional end and the kind of consumer or communicator or knowledge worker angle. And you guys can take away this messaging as it applies to both of those markets. And it doesn't have to be government. I position it to government. And usually it could be in a huge crowd, like at the Adobe Digital Government Assembly that's pictured here, where it's 300 government employees and they want to hear about workflows and best practices. Or it can be something small, where I'm just with a smaller group. So usually how I start breaking it out is by defining creativity and how Forrester defines creativity in a survey that they did called the Creative Dividend back in August of 2014. And they went across 500 different high-level senior creative directors and strategists across Fortune 500 companies and polled them about whether or not they see a dividend, or if they see a return on investment in not just cultivating creative professionals or communications professionals, but in cultivating best practices in creativity and in making their organizations more creative. Think outside of the box, the old standby term. And so these are the vocabulary words that kind of gelled when asking these 500 senior and VP level executives, how do you define creativity, right? And a culture based in learning, I really like that one. Not afraid of failure, willing to take risks, diverse backgrounds, fostering innovation, having emotional bonds. So these are all ways that when I start breaking down for the non-professional creatives in the room, right, think about how in your work in finance or HR or in marketing or in IT, think about how you've had to overcome obstacles and rise to different challenges, and how you would apply creativity not in a layout and color and typography and design sense, but how you would architect a solution to a problem by being creative, and whether or not that had a real return on your investment of time and energy and teamwork. And so what my group at the Adobe Federal level has done was actually polled almost 200 creative directors inside of the government. And so I'm not going to kill you with these stats, but I'm just showing this to you as a way of illustrating how when you're talking about the value of the platform and the mobile tools, how bringing in real world use cases and statistics from that are verified by a third party is really useful to build the story. So Adobe and Edelman polled almost 200 creative directors in government, asking them a whole bunch of questions about whether or not they see creativity and those best practices in creativity making the government more efficient and enabling better service. Of course, many of them said yes. And there were questions about mobile changing the face of design, and how mobile is a catalyst really a turning point for them in how they approach any problem around design. And so, I think what we see is there's actually a lot of room for collaborating on mobile, creating content on mobile. So that's impressive. And also high quality imagery is seen in government organizations as the top driver of creativity. Of course, there are many more, but high quality imagery, obviously in Adobe's wheelhouse very much. But a lot of these other ones, right, having a well-designed website and creative campaign ideas and everything. So we kind of took those all together and we put them in a white paper, and I deliver that wherever I happen to be. And we also have some other generic statistics about how S&P 500 companies only have these days in this era of digital disruption, when mobile and social media and cloud computing has really disrupted the traditional ways of doing business, how 40% of them won't even be around in 10 years because they will not have adapted to the digital disruption that is happening, right? And the key to these high-performing companies that stay alive and thrive amidst this digital disruption is great design. And so we bring examples, and I'm not going to show you all the government examples because I want to actually get to the demos, but we show examples of different government organizations that have amassed accolades and have these great ROIs around design. And we talk about the way that the old way of doing business, siloed workflows, and the new way of doing business, which is on-demand content sourcing, a connected supply chain of content and continuous engagement, right? So the new approach is facilitated, of course, by the Creative Cloud, right? Of course, I'm not visiting these people as an outside contractor. We're visiting as Adobe. So we talk about the Creative Cloud not only as a means for getting the best bang out of your buck from your creative pros, but also empowering more of your team, right? I like this, empower more of your team. So the world-class creative apps that we're all familiar with, we all know how to, blow someone's socks off with Photoshop or with Adobe Animate. But it's those knowledge workers, it's the folks that are not professionals that the Creative Cloud enterprise platform and really any of the other platforms are going to make important. We talk about user and license management. This is something that is very specific to the enterprise offering of Creative Cloud, so I'm not going to dive too deeply into that. But the ability to publish and measure engagement, right, with DPS, otherwise known as AEM Publish, or AEM Mobile, sorry. And then stock images, typekit fonts, right, all of that. And so there's also a high degree of security with Creative Cloud for Enterprise and extensibility into the Marketing Cloud, which a lot of our government customers like. But the linchpin of all of it is this idea of Creative Sync, which we heard about at Adobe Max last year. And we've been seeing kind of the evidence of Creative Sync kind of gathering steam for years, in the Creative Cloud offerings. But right now, Creative Sync has reached kind of a bedrock status for the platform. And I think that's Adobe's overall objective, is that through this idea of Creative Sync, where it doesn't matter where you start your workflow or end your workflow, that all of your content, your assets, your everything that you work with to be successful is just going to follow you from device to device, right? And that's a pretty tall order. It's something that Adobe's never really promised before. And so making that work, not just in the small world of the individual, not only in the world of the individual proprietor, which is not necessarily a small world, but in the individual setting, in the team setting, in the enterprise setting is where it really starts taking off. So libraries, I'm sure you're familiar with, but the way that we pitch libraries into the enterprise, and specifically in government, is as this single repository that follows the end user. It's really the anchor of the Creative Sync platform that syncs across desktops and devices and allows the individual to become part of a team and to share assets. I'm actually not going to illustrate a lot of libraries here. I'm sure you guys have seen that, and it's a game-changing functionality. But some of the example workflows that leverages libraries and the mobile apps, it could start in somewhere like Adobe Capture, get added to libraries, right? Any of those color palettes, brushes, shapes that you capture from Adobe Capture, sync it to the libraries, which then migrates over to your desktop apps. Those libraries, again, can be shared. But what I want to talk about, and where I usually start with these knowledge workers and end users, is not any of this highfalutin, you show them too many mnemonics, product mnemonics and product brands, and they just get a little bit deer in headlights. It's too much. It's a little bit of overload for them. But this is just a way for you, the community professionals, to kind of orient yourselves to these. Some of these icons you've known for years. Some of them are relatively new. Adobe Comp, Photoshop Sketch, Photoshop Mix, Photoshop Fix, Adobe Voice, Adobe Draw, right? Some of the iOS and Android tablet devices. But anything that gets contributed from those mobile apps and can consume and digest and spit out great looking fonts and stock imagery, in any of those applications, that can basically get its way back to the desktop and for final specking and approval and everything like that. So this, and I realize I've already gone on for way too long on the workflow, but this is really just building the context for you guys. I am going to demo stuff and show you cool stuff, but I want to build the story context for you a little bit before we launch into that. Because not every audience is shown this, but I know that you guys as Adobe community professionals can kind of handle the obtuse, ethereal nature of this. This is really more where I start with knowledge workers, is the idea of creativity for everyone. And so if you've been following Adobe Voice, Adobe Slate, and Adobe Post, right? These are small applications on iOS, and I'm not sure if they're on Android yet, but they're mobile applications for iPhone and iPad, and they are very easy to use, and they integrate very powerfully with the Creative Cloud platform in a way that might not be familiar to you guys. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. This is one of the reviews, right? We didn't actually make this up, and this came through just the other day about Adobe Voice, which is this app on the iTunes App Store for creating very quick videos. So I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, both daughters, and this is basically how they talk about voice, just not with the bleeped out words, because they're very passionate about using Adobe Voice. They've made all kinds of stuff, which you'll actually see in my catalog in a little while. So the NDA, and notice that I've marked this as NDA. The NDA content of today's presentation is really about how Adobe is putting these 3 applications together under one umbrella application that's going to be available just in the browser. And that project, or that one kind of umbrella application that'll be web browser based, is codenamed Project Marvel. And believe me, I asked before this presentation for anything I could say about when Project Marvel will actually get an official product name and ship, and I wasn't even able to get that information. However, what I was given the ability to do was get everybody an invite to kick the tires on the Project Marvel private beta. So at the end, I'll put up the link to where you guys can go, and it's actually very easy. You go to the URL. It's not the obtuse process of signing up for beta software that you have on the desktop apps or signing up for some MDM. It's just going to a URL, signing in with your Adobe ID, and you can get going pretty well. But the idea, again, is to remove the friction from the process of creating compelling, beautiful content by people who are not creative professionals necessarily, but who may aspire to it, right? It's kind of an aspirational level, right? So this is the product Zen, right? Making it easy and fun for everyday communicators to turn their ideas into beautiful visual stories that make an impact. And I'm sure many of you have actually worked with these in the past. I tend to, and this comes straight from the product team, by the way, the initial target. I think change agent could probably just be modified to say, communicator, right? Anybody who needs to communicate something, solo entrepreneurs, bloggers, and folks like that. And so the use cases,
I think
as you'll
just
see,
about
there are a
the
number
link
of
for
them.
Project Marvel.
What I
you're
use
going
them
to be
for when
giving
I'm
that.
traveling across the country
What's
is
the
to highlight the place
Thank you.
that I am
And what's
visiting.
the export
Right?
format for
So
Marvel?
as you saw in that initial slide, right, I go all
With
across the
Sandy
country, and now I'm
video.
going to step out of PowerPoint because I've killed you with it already. I'll actually do for you guys like a before and after, right? Like I'll show you the finished product of what I made, and because this is how I walk it through with the actual audiences that I talk to, right? So what I'm looking at right now, and I'll go into, I'll enter full screen here so we can, get a better view. So this is a slate about a trip that I took last month to New York and Washington, D.C. So right off the bat, I just start scrolling. I've got a nice parallax effect. I've got this cool kind of, sliding up effect. I've got this nice background image that as I scroll up, you can see that the image is kind of scaling inside of the background unit. I've got images inside of this little kind of slideshow column that, right, as I scroll up, there's some nice transparency effects and motion effects with a little bit of kind of nice, nice, what do they call that when the transition kind of starts and stops really nicely? I know it's been a while since I've done that in Animate, but as you can see, what I've done here at the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum is I went in, I took a bunch of photos. These all come from my phone. None of this is particularly, it's not a super nice camera, but I took photos of their exhibit, the Beauty Triennial exhibit. Then I went into their Immersion Room, which is this really cool room that has this big tablet that you can draw a pattern on, and that pattern is projected and reflected simultaneously up on the wall, it actually in several walls, and then you can also choose different wallpaper patterns from over the history of the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum's collection, right? So, these are some of the patterns that you can choose. Then I went to the Adobe offices in Union Square. And for those of you who are in New York or close to New York, if you go to Fifth Avenue and 14th Street, you can actually go straight to the Adobe offices. They're on the 4th floor. You probably need someone to sign you in, but it's a really cool office. That's where Behance is. If you're familiar with Behance.
Me too.
Of course, while in New York, I had meals and dinner. I took the train. I rode the quiet car. I presented at this big government digital assembly. And then the last part is all the assets that I created, right? So these are the colors, the brushes, and the graphics that I created with Adobe Capture, right? So these are some of the graphics that I was able to capture. This is using Lightroom Mobile to organize the photos, which I'm going to show you guys a bunch of this. Then I took some of those patterns and graphics and actually used them in an Adobe Draw. I drew a bunch of things in Adobe Draw, of course, showing how those patterns could be laid in with the colors that I captured, just playing around and drawing stuff. And so I presented all of this to I presented this slate, although not in a completely finished state, to the design folks at the Cooper Hewitt Museum to show them, hey, you guys have a Creative Cloud Enterprise license because you're part of the Smithsonian Institute. You guys can use that. And they were so blown away, and they loved it so much that they gave me a bunch of swag from their gift shop that they themselves designed, interestingly, and sent home with me for my kids. So now at the very end of the slate, there's a nice little link here to access the library that I just showed you. So I click there and it kicks open assets.adobe.com, and there's a link to the library that I created as part of this presentation and exercise. So if I come back here to Slate, which is just slate.adobe.com, you can see that I've done this for New York, for Phoenix, for Helena, Montana, San Francisco, Honolulu. Let's see, I know there's more. But yeah, I've done this so far for 5 different cities. And each one of them, right, maybe I'll walk around for an hour or 2 hours, right? In Phoenix, I walked around for a couple hours in their arts district and took a lot of photos. San Francisco, I did a bit of a city walk. Helena, Montana, there's not too many places to go, really, but I tried to make it as visually interesting as possible. Hawaii is, extremely interesting visually, so that wasn't too hard. But the workflow that I usually start off showing these folks is based in my phone, right? Because the phone is where everything happens for most non-professionals, right? And so the first thing that I show them is that there are a ton of Adobe apps that they can get. The one that I like the most is for organizing photos when I'm going to try and make a slate like this is, of course, Lightroom Mobile. And before I show them Lightroom Mobile, usually I'll just show them what's in my camera roll. And so in my camera roll right now, if I scroll down a little bit, you'll see that I've got all the photos from my trip to New York, right? So this is what I showed you in my slate was a pretty highly curated set of photos that I selected. But when, these days in the age of phones where, there's a huge amount of memory on this phone and I can just go through and get 2 or 3 shots of everything and then very quickly pick through them, I'll take 600 shots just in a 2-hour span, just clicking and looking at everything that I see. I mean, that's a really great way to derive a lot of visual inspiration around colors and textures and patterns and the design of things. And that's how I try and inspire the folks that I'm talking to, is to say, look, you're no longer constrained for getting visual inspiration by having a big hulking DSLR hanging around your neck. Like, you can be very inspired just by whipping out whatever phone you have and just tapping. Now, the intimidation part is, well, if I have 600 photos, how the heck do I organize those and choose which ones are really great? And so that's where I say that Lightroom Mobile comes in. So I'll tap on Lightroom Mobile, and as you can see, I've got a whole bunch of different collections here, right? And these span my professional and personal life, right? Like my holiday visit to Atlanta and some of my own personal stuff. But if I wanted to create a brand new collection for, let's say, the Adobe Creative Professionals, I would just hit the plus sign. I'd call it, ACP Demo. Right, there we go. There's my ACP Demo. And I'd go in there. No photos currently available, so I'll go ahead and add some photos from my camera roll. And now that'll take me to, everywhere that I am right now. Let's see, I'm going to scroll up. So these are all of my New York photos. And I'm just going to show you this by means of example, because eventually you're going to see, what the usefulness and utility is. So let's say, right, I went, after I saw the show, I went to Times Square and I took a bunch of selfies, trying to get the perfect selfie to get in here. So all I'm going to do with my big fat 45 pixel fingers, I'm just going to drag really quickly over all those selfies there in Times Square, and notice that it just allows me to drag my finger over all the ones that I want, right? Pretty good. I say add 22 photos, and that's just going to add them directly into that demo. Now check out this little cloud sync guy here. So what's happening with that sync is these photos are not just syncing here to my local Lightroom Mobile instance. What's happening is it's going up. Oh, hey. Okay, I guess. Oh, nice. I didn't even realize that it was responsive. So what happens is that that's actually going up into my Lightroom Mobile repository. So if I come to, right, with my Adobe ID all ready to go, if I go to lightroom.adobe.com, what I'll be able to see is a bunch of, like, basically all of my collections, right? So I can come in and say, view all of my recent photos. I can look at my recent collections. Notice that ACP Demo, right? There's ACP Demo right there. That's one of my recent collections. And look, I added 22, right? So from my mobile device directly over to ACP Demo, and here's all of my collections right here, right? Ready to go. And if I go over to Lightroom on my desktop, and right, I've got my Adobe Roadshows catalog open. If I come over here to my collections, There's ACP demo. There's all of my photos, right? So that syncing between Lightroom Mobile and the desktop is pretty useful, if I want to go through. But I don't frame this necessarily for the people that I'm presenting to, because what I say is these photos are going to be available anywhere, right? These photos are now available to me on the go. But why did I even take this step of doing this? Well, because what I'm going to want to do is go through inside of these photos and say, do I want this to be part of my eventual presentation? Probably not. So I'm going to skip over here down at the bottom. Notice that you can flag and rate, right? So just by taking my finger and sliding up once, I turn that to a picked, right? So that's now, if you're in Lightroom Professional, to pick a photo out of a collection, you just hit the P key. And to unflag it or unpick it, you hit the U key to unflag or unpick, right? So I'm just going to go through these photos, right? Actually, I really don't like that photo, so I'm going to swipe down twice to make it an unselect, right, or reject it. That one is really dark. These are all really dark. I'm just flagging all of these as unselects. Although I'm kind of lazy. I usually don't even do this. I usually just pick the one that I like the most. So let's see. You know what? That's good, but I want one where I'm actually looking, one where it's not all blown out like that, so I have a little bit more dynamic range. So this is a good one. So I'm going to swipe up to pick that one. So right now, as you'll notice, I've only actually picked one image. And so this is going to be useful a little bit later on when I'm building my slate, and you'll see why in a minute. So all right, so now I've picked one of those. If I were to go in and say filter by picked, so I just tapped the name ACP demo there at the top. Oh, it looks like I've actually picked two. So let's see, which ones did I pick? Oh, I see. So it must be picking up another one that I imported that was already picked. Interesting. Let's see, are they different? Right, so this one has actually been developed a little bit. This one has not. So for the non-professional, what I'll say is, even if you don't have Lightroom on your desktop necessarily, you can come down to the bottom and make all kinds of adjustments to this photo right here in Lightroom Mobile on your phone while you're traveling. And that's how I highlight it. I say, look, while I'm going around to these places, while I'm waiting in an elevator, or I'm, getting on the train to go from one place to another, I'm not taking out my laptop. I'm doing all of this stuff on my phone because it has become socially acceptable to just stare into your phone while you're on public transit or, walking down the street. And I find that it actually makes me more creatively productive to be able to do this type of thing. Like, for example, go in and adjust, right? Maybe I'll do an auto tone. Let's see. Nah, that's not so good. How about we'll just bring the exposure up a little bit, right? Maybe we'll come and bring the highlights down so we get more detail inside of those marquees. Maybe we'll let's see what happens if we bring the shadows up. No, because that's making more of a halo. But we could probably use a little bit of contrast. There we go. Now I'll bring in some clarity, which kind of sharpens things up a little bit, and make the vibrance so that those colors really pop up really nicely. Right, so as you see, just by tapping around on my phone with some sliders, it's really easy to do the kind of basic things that you would do, in Lightroom on the desktop. And lo and behold, when I go back to Lightroom on my desktop, and let's say I wanted to filter through all of these by the picked ones. So here is, let's see, I think that's the one that I have just been sitting here adjusting. And in just a moment, if I go into my develop module, right, you'll see that over on the left-hand side, the history of this photo is that it was imported from Lightroom Mobile. But in just a moment, we should be seeing the adjustments that I made in Lightroom Mobile showing up, right? So, oh, I'm sorry, this is, right, looks like this is the one, right? We did shadows, highlights, contrast, exposure, clarity, vibrance, and this one should be coming through as well. Maybe I'm having a connectivity issue. But you get the point, right? Is that the mobile workflow on the phone? There we go. So it just took another minute to kick in. But you can see, right, those adjustments that I made from Lightroom Mobile kicked over onto the desktop as well. And so that's really useful when you want to deal with a single asset that has a single source of truth. So we just recently shipped this cool new capability inside of Lightroom on the desktop. And I'm just here to show you kind of how it would be used. So if you'll notice here, and I'll come back to my phone just to orient you one more time, right? I've got a ton of collections, right? I've got Kaboom and Max and Portland, and right, I haven't made my Portland one yet. I didn't take enough photos to really make that one meaningful. But I've really got a bunch of these. So let's say I need to search really quickly. I know that I took a photo of a sunset or helicopter or something, but I don't remember which collection it's in, or I don't have time to like search through and pick it out. So one of the things that we just implemented as a technology preview for Lightroom for the web client is this idea, and if I go into welcome, it kind of describes it, right? So this is using our newly developed image recognition technology, so you can search the contents of your photos. So basically when I click there, it says, do you want to add a search bar enabling you to search through all of your photos? Now, again, this is a technology preview. It's one of those experiments that Adobe is doing to see whether or not it will actually work and in the real world. And so we're putting this into the Creative Cloud. But now, if I wanted to come in, that New York, DC, let's see, what could I search on, right? So that's a chair. There's not a lot here that's really all that recognizable. Chair or desk, right? Here's some chairs. So maybe I'll go back up into all photos and I'll do a search on chair and see what comes up. All right, so here's some chairs. There's a chair. There are chairs, right? It actually, there's a chair. It actually did a pretty decent job. There's chairs. Huh, not too shabby. That's a bench. So it even got the fact that there's right? This is restaurants with chairs, all kinds of, there's chairs in here. I'm a little impressed, to be honest with you. Yes, I did find what I was looking for. So make sure to add your feedback when it actually does a decent job finding what you're looking for. Now, of course, imagine, a few years out in the future where it sees the faces and says, hey, who are these people? And there is a facial tagging feature in Lightroom that, if you sync up your existing Lightroom catalog that has facial tags in it, you would be able to search on facial tags just the same way that you can in Lightroom. But another one, right? I did this one recently, just helicopter, and boom, all the photos that I have of this Chinook in the Diamond Head crater, showed up. So it's fairly powerful and fairly cool. And I'll show this to the folks in the room as an aside. It's like, let's think about not just the convenience of being able to work on your photos in a mobile context, right? Syncing them all with this cloud repository that can, is a single source of truth for your Lightroom, for your mobile device, and for your browser. But we're actually building intelligence into this platform so that, we actually know metadata about your assets based on the content of the assets themselves. So that's very powerful and useful. So then what I do after I show them, this is one way to work. And sometimes I'll pick out images to kick over into Photoshop Fix, right? So for example, if I look at, and I'll take things through the workflow, right? So for example, let me see, there's got to be a photo in here of my friends that I took the background out of. I don't really have time to show it because we're already at 10:45 and I want to get to the Project Marvel piece of it. But, it's very simple to take photos out of Lightroom and fix them really quickly using Adobe Photoshop Fix on your mobile device just by smudging your finger over. So sometimes I show that as well. And of course, if you're familiar with Adobe Capture, right, that's the place where those, these cool patterns and cool shapes and everything are captured. So I'll spend some time doing that, right? Like taking something that's interesting and creating a shape out of it and then applying that shape in Adobe Draw, right, which is the iPad app. And well, it's actually, interestingly, it's an iPhone app as well. And applying those patterns and making something look really cool. And interestingly, by the way, here's another great little tip. So if you haven't installed this guy, then you might think about it. It's the Creative Cloud app for iPad and iOS. It's just a straight up Creative Cloud mobile application. Here, I'll make that full screen again so you can see. So, right, you've got all of these, Acrobat and Capture and all this stuff, but the red one at the upper left, right, Creative Cloud. So it has this really amazingly useful little, like, nobody knows about it feature that they built into it that I use all the time. It's like if you use Airdrop ever to wirelessly get photos from your camera roll onto your desktop, just using whatever existing Wi-Fi. So it's the same concept, but you're getting these assets into your Creative Cloud files repository. And so, right, this is the look at all of my files in my Creative Cloud repository. If I go into Preferences, so notice this thing called Screenshot Sync, right? I can't tell you how useful this has been for putting those screenshots that you saw of Adobe Draw and Adobe, Slate and all these other things, it actually into the presentation itself. And so I'll just show you a quick demo of how it works, right? So if I go into Adobe Draw, right, Illustrator Draw, personally I am not down with like branding everything according to the desktop. I think it kind of obscures the real purpose of the tool. Be that as it may. So let's say I'm coming in here. And this pattern in Adobe Draw, right, this bet pattern, that's a Hebrew letter, right? So I go in and I look at the layers, right? And I just drop that in. If I wanted to drop in another pattern, for her to sit on, maybe I would, just come in and, grab this shape thing and I'd go into all the shapes that I've created. Maybe I want her to sit on the Hamilton, the Hamilton star. So I'll grab that shape and now I can make that a little bit bigger. Of course, I'll have to move her up a little bit, but now I can just double tap, it's supposed to be working. Oh, right, because that layer was turned off. Maybe I should start another layer. There we go. There we go. So now she's sitting on top of that shape that I made with Adobe Capture. And I can then get out of there and start working with that, as it were. Okay, so let's say I'm ready to screen cap this because I want to put it inside of my presentation. So everybody knows the good old iOS screen cap method, which is hit the big button down at the bottom and also the power button at the same time. And you get that little right, there we go. Took my screen cap. Now, when I come on back to the Creative Cloud app, since I have Screenshot Sync turned on, watch what happens on my desktop in just a moment. That screenshot has now been synced to my Creative Cloud files repository, right? So if I go into my Finder now and I look in my Creative Cloud files and I go into my screenshots folder, so these are all the different screenshots that I've taken over the course of time. So there's a screenshot of the thing that I just made. Here's screenshots that I've used that I was doing yesterday in preparation for today, right? All the screenshots that I put into the presentation, pretty cool. And right, so now when going into Adobe Slate to actually make a presentation, right? And actually, let's do this with Project Marble because that's really. And by the way, right? Here's the URL: projectm.adobe.com. Right, so go there. Again, this is under NDA. You can't go out and share this URL yet with the folks in the community who are not under NDA, right? Just because it's still a private beta. But that being said, go kick the tires, go kick the crap out of this, and tell us. There's feedback forms for every tool. There's stuff that is still pretty broken, and I just went testing it yesterday, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just really kind of embarrassingly incomplete. But again, I don't know when it's shipping, so it could be months and months away. But all I'm saying is projectm.adobe.com, sign in with your Adobe ID, and you guys can kick the tires on it. But anyway, so I'll just take you through, right? A slate is called a page, voice is called a video, and a post is called a post, right? So I'm just gonna, make a new page. And one of the objections that I have is sometimes the load times are a little wonky. But okay, now here's my slate, and I can go ahead and add a title. I'm sure you guys have seen this before in the past, but right, I would just say ACP Prezzo, cool things at Adobe CC Mobile world, and I would go ahead and add a photo. Now, here's where this is. I gotta be honest, guys, like this is the money shot for me right here. The integration not only with that Lightroom repository of images, but now this is it. Now, this is the part where when I was going through the Project Marvel, and I was like, oh great, I can pull my photos from anywhere. If you come down here to filter, I can filter this repository by my picked images. And now only those two should show up. Do you have any idea how useful that is going to be when I'm trying to make something that is, I mean, how many images are in this, right? This is a very long, comprehensive slate. There's probably 60 images in there, but I took over 300 images. So that's one in every 5. I don't want to have to be going in there and right, like going in this repository and just go for image after image after image after image, searching for the ones, right? If I'm sitting on my mobile device, right? If I'm sitting on Lightroom or Lightroom Mobile, well, you get the point. I can pre-choose all of those images on my mobile device while I'm in transit, while I'm traveling. I can just sit there and do that without having to be at my desktop. And as somebody who travels a lot, who's in transportation systems a lot, and I need to put these presentations together in a very quick amount of time because the speed of assembling it is part of the whole impact of the presentation. That totally changed the game for me when I saw that you could filter by picked or by picked and unflagged, right? Remember, I unflagged some of those. Or I could just show all. Right now we're seeing a curated selection. So, right, I would go through and choose an image. Let me just choose an image. And by the way, what I'm doing here in Project Marvel, there's a mobile app called Adobe Slate that lets you do this too. But right, you drop it on in and you keep going. So, I mean, that's pretty much it. I wanted to leave some time for questions. But again, to get a handle on Project Marvel, it's projectm.adobe.com. I'll put it in the chat pod if Kelly hasn't already done that. But oh, cool. And now we are ready to talk about things and stuff.